This session we're going to be discussing the value of one of God's remedies, sunlight. And I thought that we would again go to our no, I've got my Bible now. Our handbook. All right. And in Psalms, the 74th Psalm, verse 16, we read this: "The day is thine," talking about God's, "the night also is thine. Thou hast prepared the light and the sun." The light and the sun. Now you might say, well, why don't we just say He's prepared the sun because there's light with the sun? No. Before there was sun, there was light, right? Who is the light? Jesus lighteth every man that cometh into the world. Okay. Ecclesiastes 11, chapter 11, verse 7, "Truly the light is sweet, and a pleasant thing it is for the eyes to behold the sun." Ecclesiastes 11, verse 7. Now, we are going to talk about one aspect of sunlight from its health point of view, and that is the production in the skin of vitamin D. Now, vitamin D is really not a vitamin at all. It's a hormone. And it's interesting that there have been reported now in the literature about 18 randomized control trials using supplemental vitamin D showing from science that vitamin D significantly reduces all-cause mortality and emphasizes now the medical as well as ethical and legal implications for the practitioner to diagnose cases of vitamin D deficiency and to treat them properly. Now, this is very important because vitamin D deficiency is pandemic. It's not just in this country. It involves not only adults, but also children. And you would think that our people would be immune to that, right? No. We're right in there with them with vitamin D deficiency. Because why? We've moved indoors. Okay? We've moved indoors. I've asked patients, how much time do you spend outside? It's amazing. These are largely Adventist people. What's an average amount of time you think people spend outside? Yeah, a half hour, maybe an hour, going here and there and so forth. So we have a problem. Not only are such deficiencies common and probably the rule, but vitamin D deficiency now has been implicated in most of the lifestyle diseases in modern civilization. Isn't that amazing? And we'll go over some of those. We mentioned that it is a steroid hormone that stimulates vitamin D receptors that are in the nucleus of cells that regulate now what we know at least 200 human genes in a wide variety of tissues, all of which help to maintain normal body physiology. So if we're deficient in the vitamin or in the hormone, vitamin D, we will not be able to activate those genes that are responsible for maintaining health in the body. Do you see why God says that sunlight is a remedy? Okay? It's a remedy. Now, the symptoms of vitamin D deficiency may be protean as well as its manifestation. Muscle weakness. There can be localized pain in various areas, muscles, joints, bones. Exactly. Many people who have been diagnosed with fibromyalgia are now, as we review their cases, found to have vitamin D deficiency. Osteopenia and osteoporosis, this demineralization process. Fractures in the elderly. On blood analysis, we do like the chemistry panels. Asymptomatic low serum calcium levels. Muscle cramps, even seizures. Now, what are the classes of individuals who are at high risk for vitamin D deficiency? The elderly. Vitamin D production in the skin decreases by as much as 75% by the age of 70 years. As you get older, the skin doesn't produce, even in the sun, as much vitamin D as a young person would. The chronically ill, the malnourished. Most of those people, where do we put the chronically ill? We institutionalize them, right? Do you remember the picture that the prophet saw at our health institutions? Where were the patients? They were outside, under the trees, laying on the grounds, in beds. And in the gardens, that's where God intended His patients to be, because that's where all the doctors are. Is outside. Okay? Okay. In fact, our physicians were instructed, get your patients out of doors, because then they're going to require much less effort to get them better, because God will be working while we're working, you see. The obese. Vitamin D is efficiently deposited in large body fat stores and then is not readily bioavailable. Those with limited sunlight exposure is another group, those that just don't get outside. Those persons who are darkly pigmented, they require 3 to 6 times more sun exposure to get the same amount of production of vitamin D.
So
and that
Grivas, you're saying I need more than you do.
Exactly. You thought it was the reverse. No, because that dark pigmentation was a protection, okay, against more of the equatorial sun exposures, you see, so that you weren't harmed by that excessive amount. Those people who are using certain medications, anticonvulsant medications, Dilantin, phenobarb, steroids, rifampin, a whole bunch of medications actually interfere with the physiology of vitamin D. Yes? That's right. That's right. Latitudes above, I believe, 35, there's much more prevalence of vitamin D deficiency. So where are we going to get vitamin D? Well, we've talked about the sunlight. It's the UV, ultraviolet B radiation. The wavelength of UVB, just, you don't have to write this down, but just interesting, 290 to 315. It is the primary source of vitamin D for most people if they are getting sunlight exposure. Sunlight will provide 90 to 95% of the individual's need. In other words, it wasn't God's plan that everybody would have to go around taking vitamin D in a pill. So when we're talking about supplementation, that's fine if you need it, but you want to get in a situation where you're getting your vitamin D like God intended you to, right? Not in a pill, but outdoors. Dietary sources are very limited for vitamin D, and they would include salmon, mackerel, sardines, cod liver oil, egg yolks. That's the natural. And then we fortify now in this country milk and cereal and orange juice and yogurts and margarines, but very little, 100 international units usually per serving. And that's hardly anything, 100 international units. So dietary sources really aren't the best, especially for those who are following God's prescription for eating. We don't want to go around eating mackerel and sardines and those kinds of things, taking cod liver oil. And then you have the supplements, which are vitamin D2, vitamin D3. Vitamin D2 is ergocalciferol, which comes from the plants that have been irradiated. The vitamin D3 is cholecalciferol, and it comes usually from the sheep wool, the lanolin there in the sheep. Now, we're not going to spend a lot of time on the physiology, but whether you take D2 or D3, or whether you get outside and get sun exposure and the body makes your D3, whatever, those then are carried to the liver, and they undergo a process of hydroxylation. From the liver, then, it goes to the kidney. The kidney actually continues that activation of this substance to where you're forming the active vitamin D, which is 1,25-dihydroxy vitamin D. Now, you don't have to know all that, but we want to keep it simple, but physicians need to know that because of what happens when people get into kidney failure. They're not producing that, you see. And so you've got to then be able to know how to address their needs and supplement with what is necessary. Now, you may want to know this because if you haven't had a vitamin D level, you ought to work with your physician to get one. Now, most physicians, hopefully now, know the right kind of vitamin D to order, but you need to write it down so you can help them if they don't. It's 25-hydroxy OH. In other words, 25 OH vitamin D. That is the standard of vitamin D measurement now in the medical circles throughout the world, and that's what we're using for norms now. 25-hydroxy, or OH, vitamin D. Now this, once vitamin D becomes active by the action of the kidney, so it's 125-hydroxy, what does that do?